And so we're starting this prison entrepreneurship program. And so as you can imagine, trying to navigate and partner up an academic institution with a state prison is not easy. It takes a lot of entrepreneurial effort to do that. And we're launching that actually in about a month, this spring, month and a half. So, I try to play a lot and figure out there's all these support organizations in the community. There's all these entrepreneurs in the community. There's all these stakeholders on campus, and how do we weave them all together? And so I'll share some of the tools I use, both in the classroom and also in building these relationships with you, talk through some of that with you, give you a chance to see and feel what that looks and feels like. Hopefully, some of those tools are things you can take with you. And then whenever I speak or do anything, I always leave a lot of time. I try to schedule things as much as possible to leave a lot of time for some Q&A and just to kind of be an open book. Oftentimes, to my wife and colleagues' chagrin, I will answer questions that are asked of me. As I tell my students, other than politics, religion, or relationships, I'm game. Ask a question, you get an answer. I also have a pretty severe ADD or ADHD, whatever we want to call it nowadays, where I'll bounce all over the place, and I used to try to control it. I just give up. So at 50 years old, it is what it is, and hopefully you can go with me, right? And very much a conversation, right? So along the way, if you have questions or need clarification or anything like that, please don't hesitate to dive in. So a couple of things to really focus on that I suggest and I found a lot of success with in trying to build these partnerships and build these relationships are purpose, value, customers, assumptions, and experiments. And these things have served me very, very well. One, in terms of learning about other people and about other organizations, learning what will work and what won't work, or at least having a much greater confidence in what will and won't work. And then learning from the process and figuring out how to improve the value that I can deliver in whatever role we're talking about, right? So the first one really boils down to purpose. And with the curriculum that we built and everything I do, whenever I'm engaging with people, I try to understand what's their purpose. If I can understand what somebody else's purpose is, number one, I can see, does that actually match with what I can do for you or your organization? Because if it doesn't, let's just call it what it is and move on, right? If it's just not going to align, I'm not going to try to force things, especially when I'm trying to negotiate and work with other organizations. I don't have time for that. They don't have time for that. If it's not a good match, let's move on. So when I'm thinking about purpose, and the other thing is when I'm working with these organizations, I'm working with people. And so part of the way I look at it is to say, who's the person, not the organization I'm partnering with, but who's the person I'm going to partner with? Who's the person that's going to make a decision of, do we want to do this? Do we have resources for this? How are we going to do this? All that, right? So it's a person relationship, right? And so identifying that person can sometimes be a little difficult. That's where just getting on the phone, knocking on the door, talking to people to understand what are people's roles in organizations and beyond the title, because a lot of times we'll throw titles around, but they may not exactly match up with what do you actually do on a day-to-day basis and what are your responsibilities and what authority, decision-making authority kind of stuff do you have. So trying to do some due diligence and figure out who are the people in the organization that are really going to be decision makers for the particular thing you're talking about, right? So I try to figure out, how do we partner with a prison? Well, we found a guy who does programs in the prison who could get us in, right? So that's number one. Then I figure out it's the warden. The warden is the decision maker, so we have to talk to the warden and figure out, does this work, right? And when I do that, if I can understand why they do what they do, or what's going to help them out the most in that role, then there's a much greater likelihood of success. And that a lot of times does boil down to what their purpose is, right? And so when you think about purpose, one way to look at it is, some of this today might be a little traumatic for some older folks. The old Venn diagram, right? If you think about a Venn diagram, in my mind, purpose is really at the heart of that, where the intersection of interests you have, skills you have, and the impact you want to have in the world. And if you find the intersection of those three things, oftentimes you're going to find people's purpose. So in our curriculum, this is the first thing we do. So the first thing I always do in classes is I want students to understand and try to dig into what is their purpose, right? Why are they here? So what kind of things are you interested in, right? And when you're working with people at an organization, they have certain interests, and hopefully those interests are going to somewhat align with their job, with what they do, and why they're there. And so you kind of start to understand what are the kinds of things that interest you. The other reason to do that is because you're ultimately having to make a human connection, right? You want somebody to ultimately make a decision to partner with you. That may mean give you time, give you resources, give you access to things, whatever it is. If I can make a connection with you as a human being, then there's a greater likelihood that we can get to some place where we can collaborate. Okay. Oftentimes, if you're trying to understand somebody's interest, what I will a lot of times do is I will ask them, right? But then I will also ask them, what would their best friend say are their interests, right? We're typically pretty bad at evaluating ourselves for the most part, and so you want to figure out what do other people say you're interested in, right? What would other people say that really kind of lights you up and rings your bell, okay? And then skills, what are you good at? What is somebody good at? What are they trying to get better at, right? What kind of skills do they want to develop? Those kind of things. And in the mix of those two, in the mix of interests and skills, is usually people's passion, right? And I hear a lot in entrepreneurship, and we hear this all the time about pursue your passion. I think that's not enough. And I think it's not something that maybe a lot of people resonate with or can really wrap their head around. And so there's some passion lies somewhere at that intersection of what are you interested in and what are you good at, right? But then we want to take it a step further and go, okay, but what kind of impact are you want to have? What kind of impact are you trying to have? And again, as an individual, right, if I'm trying to collaborate and talk to people in an organization, I'm not too much interested in what's the mission of the organization or whatever. I can get that off a website or a Facebook page or whatever. But this person I'm talking to, like, what's their purpose? Why are they here? What impact are they trying to create while working for this organization in the role they have? And then that mix, what you're interested in, what you're good at and want to get better at, and the impact you're trying to have, what kinds of people are you trying to impact? Right there, somewhere in the middle there, ends up being a purpose, right? And again, if that somewhat aligns with what I'm trying to do or what I'm trying to accomplish, then much greater likelihood that there's going to be some kind of magic that happens. Okay, and so that's the first conversation. The other reason that's a great conversation is because now we're really getting to know each other as human beings on a fairly deep level, right? And so we build those connections, and even if something doesn't happen, I now have that person as part of my network, and we can leverage that, right? And I always want to be also forthcoming and share that information about me with anybody that I'm engaging with. When you're dealing with organizations and you're trying to collaborate with organizations, it just brings it down to this human level. And so there's a greater likelihood that, you're going to be able to make progress, and you're going to be able to figure out, well, maybe this woman is not the right one to talk to, but in the conversation, she's figured out, like, oh no, you should go talk to this guy, right? And they can help navigate you through the organization, okay? And so you have this sense of purpose that you can start with. And in that, then, you can start to figure out, okay, what's the value? What's the value this person is looking for in their role? What's the value that I can bring to this person in their role? And with all the resources I have and the network I have and everything that I have with the organization that I represent, can I bring value to them? Okay. And the value really, in my mind, comes down to solving problems, right? Human beings make decisions based on emotion in order to solve a problem. So anytime you buy something, anytime you use something, you're making an emotional decision, and you're choosing that thing because it solves a problem for you. This may or may not be conscious. A lot of times, in fact, we do it pretty subconsciously, but that's really what's going on. I argue with a lot of colleagues because people with PhDs like to intellectually argue about things that don't often matter. But I argue a lot of times with colleagues because a lot of people, oh, well, but I make, it's rational, right? I make these rational decisions. And I go, no, you don't. You make these decisions emotionally, and then you use rational logic to justify it, to make yourself feel good about it, or to explain to your wife why you had to have that bauble, right? That kind of a thing. And so understanding somebody's decision-making process is going to be vital to, again, building these kind of collaborations and working with these organizations. And this comes, again, from individual conversations between you and another human being. And so, you want to get to a place where you can understand the problems that customer faces, right? Because even if you're not trying to sell something to somebody, you want something from them. You want access to something. You want to build a relationship with them in their organization, whatever. So you're asking for something from them. And so you want to understand what their problem is, okay? And so to do this, and this is a big part of our curriculum, it's kind of like the core of our curriculum, and everything that I build in the entrepreneurship area is this idea of customer discovery, development, interviewing, whatever you want to call it. There's lots of buzzwords that get thrown around about this. And a lot of this came out of, or at least became fairly popular in the lean startup movement. So there were these books, and these couple guys got really rich off putting some materials out there, which are wonderful. But the thing they didn't do is tell you actually how to do it, right? They published some books and created a big marketing machine to go on a speaking tour and do all kinds of tools and stuff. But then they forgot to say, but here's how you actually kind of do it. And so that was the niche that my co-founders and I figured out was, well, teachers need to know how to do this so that we can teach young people how to build these skills, okay? And this customer interviewing part is really at the heart of it, in my opinion, because you can have the greatest idea and you can have the greatest team with you, but if you don't align what you're trying to do with a problem that actual people are experiencing that your idea, product, service is going to solve, then you have a much greater likelihood of failing, okay? And this is the same logic if you're engaging with, trying to partner with organizations. So this is kind of what it looks like. So I'm going to pick on you. Please say no if you're not into it. But I need somebody who's willing to answer some questions, be a little bit vulnerable. We won't go too deep. But you're good?
I'm good.
All right. What's your name?
Thaddeus.
Thaddeus? Okay. Nice to meet you, Thaddeus. So we'll just go with Thaddeus. Doctor. Okay, so give me a little context on you, just so I understand where we're at here. So give me a little context on various roles that you have in your life, important roles that you identify in your life.
Outside of family
and anything.
Okay, so family. I'm a filmmaker.
Okay. Family. Do you mind giving me a little context on family? What?
Father.
Okay.
Husband. Brother, son, Uncle Frank.
Kids? What?
Yes, 3 boys.
Oof. Okay. Ages?
18, 16, and 9.
Oof. Okay. All right.
So challenging. Wife is brilliant, so she keeps me in line.
Of course.
I'm an entrepreneur.
Okay.
And I teach. So
Okay.
I teach photography, videography, multimedia business, and video editing.
Okay.
Active in the film community here. So I think that takes a big part of my life. Active on trying to start a engaged and unique ecosystem for filmmakers here in South Carolina.
Okay, so we got a bunch of roles that Thaddeus has in his life. And let's say I'm somebody who I have an idea or have a product or service or something that I'm trying to sell, and the customer that I'm trying to go after is a parent of young people who are nearing that college age, right? So you have an 18-year-old, you said, and a 16-year-old. Is 18 college in the works for them as far as your...
Tech school now, wants to transfer to USC next semester.
Okay. And 16-year-olds thinking about maybe not quite there yet?
He wants to be in
Okay.
Construction.
Okay.
Good job. So.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we can look at it and say, all right, so Thaddeus has got a couple boys who are kind of leaving that high school space or getting ready to leave that high school space and trying to figure out what's going next. So there's really 5 questions that are critical when doing these customer interviews. And a lot of people like to complicate things. I like to simplify things. 1, because it's easier on my brain. 2, because it doesn't waste as much time for me. I can get the information I need, I can get it quickly, and I can make decisions based on that information rather quickly so that we can all make progress, right? So when you're working with these support organizations, when you're working with government agencies, when you're working with community partners, again, you're talking to people and trying to understand what's the hardest part about their job. right? So I'm going to talk to Thaddeus here. I'm going to say, all right, so as a father of teenagers heading towards post high school life, what's the hardest part about that job? So that's question one.
Giving them the skills to go out and be their own person.
Okay, so getting them the skills to go out and be their own person. So tell me a little bit about the last time that you were sort of actively trying to do that. Let's pick one kid. We'll use one kid as a case study here.
My oldest son.
All right, we'll use the oldest. What's his name, if you don't mind?
Jaden.
Jaden. Okay, so when's the last time you were working with Jaden trying to?
Every day.
Okay.
He's 18. So he doesn't listen. He has an entrepreneurial spirit, but he doesn't want to listen to his dad, who has the degrees in this field.
Yep.
But he listens to his friends. So he'll come back with information from a friend, and I'll either say, yeah, that's absolutely true, or no, well, you might want to think about it this way. And he's getting better at that. But the life skills stuff, the soft skills, those are a lot harder. Managing money. So, hey, you've got to pick up your brother every day this week and go to class. I'm giving you X amount of dollars. That's your gas money for the week. You need to, but he wants to, go to the skate park, take his buddy home. They want to go hang out and get McDonald's or whatever, and come back, and then in the middle of the week, he's like, hey, Dad, I don't have any money. You don't have a job either, so
Yeah.
he works with me, so those things are where we're constantly working on: money management,
Okay.
time management, skills, and being around the right people. Learning that you can't save everybody. He's like me in that aspect. He wants to help and save everyone. It's a bit much at 18.
Yeah.
Trying to do that.
So can you think of sort of the last time you were talking to Jaden about sort of money management and financial issues? So when was that? Run me through high level that type of conversation.
Usually is in the beginning of the week, because
Okay.
I send him the money for gas, and we talk about, hey, son, all right, I sent you the money for gas for this week. Pick up your brother. Don't forget. Dad, I got it. Don't forget to take out the trash, that kind of stuff. Oh yeah, time management. Why are you up at 3 in the morning still doing homework
Mhm.
that you should have finished earlier? That kind of stuff. So you got to manage your time better. I'm kind of hands off a little more. You're making choices. You have to understand the consequences of your choices. So instead of being like the fussing, parent, I'm more like, really gonna stay up till 3? Okay, all right. Well, let's see how that works out for you.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Are you gonna spend your gas money to go to Chick-fil-A? Okay. All right. Well, we'll see how that works out for you. And we kind of go back and forth with that. And he'll be like, yeah, Dad, I'm so sleepy this morning. That's what happens when you stay up till 4 in the morning and have to be back up at 9.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things. But that's every week. That's a reoccurring kind of. It's usually different scenarios, same problem. If that makes
Okay,
sense.
absolutely, right. And so now what I'm doing is I'm starting to figure out, right, here are the problems that Thaddeus faces in this particular role in his life. Here are the problems that he faces that are most relevant and most sort of right now, right? I'm not interested in things that happened 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, because those are not problems they're currently trying to solve, right? So again, if I'm looking at a target customer of a father of a later teen, right, I'm starting to get really good information about what are the types of solutions that he might be looking for. If you're talking to people at a university, if you're talking to people at a support organization in the community, you have this kind of conversation with them and you start to understand these are the problems they're experiencing that they're hoping to solve, right? They're actively working to solve these things, because ultimately what I want to do is sell Thaddeus something, right? And selling things is really, really difficult. So if I can understand the problem that he has, so I can make sure I don't need to sell him that he has this problem, all I need to do is sell him that my solution's better. I have to make one sale. That's tough to do. But if I have to try to convince him that he has the problem that my product solves, and then convince him that my product is better for it, I got to sell twice. That's really, really, really difficult, right? So that's part of the power of these kind of conversations, is you start to understand where are the easy access points to be able to sell whatever it is you're selling, right? Whatever product, whatever service, whatever collaboration that you're offering to sell. Okay. And so what I'm learning is these are relevant current problems that Thaddeus is experiencing on a regular basis, right? I feel your pain, minus 18, ditto, right? And so thinking about, let's say the last time that weekend you're leading up to this conversation, what does that feel like when you're having to prepare for this conversation with Jaden?
What does it feel like?
Yeah.
It feels like looking in the mirror sometimes. A lot of those decisions I made as a young man. So the feeling that I have is like, man, I really wish. How would I have wanted someone to explain it to me when I was going through it?
Gotcha. What kind of emotions come up for you when you have that?
I don't know, not fear, because I'm not fearful of the conversation. I feel like there's an opportunity there, like to give him the leg up that I didn't have, that I had to kind of figure out over years of bad money making decisions and things, and I'm trying to like kind of quantum leap him to a point where. So for me, the emotion is, I guess, anticipation of an opportunity. So to maybe a little anxiety.
Okay.
Because maybe I'm not. I don't want to mess them up, right? But I can only give you the experience that I have had.
Okay.
So I'm not fearful of it, but I think I maybe am anxious about saying the wrong thing or pushing him away to the point where, I'm the overbearing father, and now you don't want to listen to anything that I have to say.
Yep.
And so that might be anxiety.
Gotcha. And so all of that right there becomes brilliant marketing language. Absolutely brilliant, right? I don't have to guess how I'm going to position and sell this thing to Thaddeus and how I'm going to hook him, because again, remember, Thaddeus is going to make an emotional decision of whether to use or buy whatever I'm trying to sell him. He just gave me the emotions he feels at the time that he's in the midst of this problem, and so I can put all of that into marketing materials, into emails, into conversations, right? And so when you anticipate, having these conversations with him, are there any, when you're talking to him about financial and money management and all that, are there any tools that you suggest to him or apps or anything like that you kind of recommend that he use?
I always recommend books to him because I want him to discover things that work for him on his own. He's that way. He wants to discover it on his own. So I will recommend books for him to check out. So, the 48 Laws of Power he's read, like these kinds of higher, that we use, I want a higher mindset kind of shifting books, but then I'll also recommend something that's, I think, super age appropriate, like, the Dummy's Guide to Opening a Bank Account or something like
Sure.
that. Something that's kind of a very easy access, easy read, go through and just look at the questions that you have. So reading material is always what I recommend. Not necessarily apps, because he's on his phone too much already. He's on, if he finds an app that works for him, that's great. But
Gotcha.
I won't recommend those things for him.
Gotcha. And so now what I'm learning is who's my competition, right? So from this conversation with Thaddeus, I'm learning not necessarily from the products Jaden uses, but from the standpoint of my customer being Thaddeus, and how do I position my products so he's going to like them, right? He's giving me my competition. So again, in terms of marketing and in terms of having this conversation and moving towards yes, I now have a better sense of what I need to position my product or service against. In this case, books, right? And particularly, he's mentioning specific titles of books, and I can dive into that a little deeper and get more of that out of it, right? And so when you're recommending or thinking about recommending some of these assets to Jaden, what do you think isn't working about that, right? Because if you're having the conversation every week over and over again, something isn't clicking. So what do you think is sort of a deficiency or what isn't working about those particular assets that you're recommending to
I
him?
think that it just because it's coming from me.
Okay.
A lot of times, yeah, the books are a perfect example. He's got a friend that programs for Roblox,
Mm-hmm.
making lots of money doing that kind of thing. He will recommend the same books, maybe a month or two after I've recommended them, and then he'll come and say, "Hey, you have that book, or can I go to the library and get?" And it's like, "Listen, it's on the shelf. Like that book is on the bookshelf here. I recommended it to you 6 months ago,
Yeah.
a month ago." But I think that's consistent with most teenagers. Like, I'm old, right, and I don't know anything.
Yeah.
I just happen to be here. So it's one of those things where, and I don't want to. I definitely am not trying to be, like I said, that overbearing parent. I've had that. Don't. It just makes you rebel the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So I kind of let them. I think the issue is that for me, my kids don't have a full understanding of what it took for me to get to where we are as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And so they take a lot of that for granted. And having them understand that, I think, would be a good way to kind of bridge the gap. But I'm not sure if that even will work. You know, kids are just gonna be kids until there's something that clicks around, I guess, 25, where they just like, Dad.
Maybe.
I'm hoping, because like I got an 18-year-old, I have no idea.
Yeah. And so, if you're out looking for resources to share with Jaden to help him along his path, where are you hearing about these kind of resources, or where do you go to find out about ways that you can help him?
I read a lot of books.
Okay.
I talk to my nephews who are around the same age and see
Mm-hmm.
what they're into, because for some reason, the nephews are more receptive, right? They're not. I'm not their parent, right? So they're more receptive to actually. They will come to me and ask, "Hey, Uncle TJ, because that's what they're Uncle TJ. What do you do when you want to do this? Or where can I find more information?" So I use them as kind of test subjects, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're coming in and asking, and then so I'm like, "Oh, well, what are y'all reading? What are you reading? What are you trying to do?" Then I go find those books that they're into, and they're all first cousins, so they all talk. So it's just like it's kind of an in, because like they're all into anime, and
Yep.
so I look for things that might help me break down that in their language and the language that they already speak. So
Yeah.
which is hard for me because I'm not into any of that stuff. I don't know what it is.
So this was sort of like the entire conversation, right? So anytime you're trying to, and I get it all the time because I have this position I have at the university, I get people coming at me all the time inside the university trying to help me with this, partner with this, use this, whatever, and certainly external to the university, both in terms of the community I'm in, but also people trying to sell me textbooks and simulation, all these kind of things to teach, right? So I get people coming at me all the time. And almost always they're going to come at me from a sales point, and I will almost always shut that down. I have no interest. If you're not interested in learning more about me, I'm not interested in what you got to say, right? At least come at me with something like that to begin with. And so this conversation with Thaddeus, if I have a product or service I'm trying to solve, I never once have talked about that, right? In the first conversation, I just don't even bring it up because I want to learn from him, because if he's not the right person for me to be talking to, let's just call it quits now and stop wasting each other's time, right? But what I've learned is, I've asked him, what's the hardest part about being in that role? I've asked him when the last time that occurred was, right? When the last time he had that problem. Is it relevant? Is it recent? I've asked him what it feels like in that moment, right? So I get that marketing material. I've asked him what competition I have, what other resources he uses to address that problem. And I've asked him what doesn't work about that. So again, now I'm building how I differentiate my product based on what's important to Thaddeus as a customer. And then I asked him where he goes to find it. So now I've identified what channels, if I'm going to sell my thing, what channels can I put it in to more effectively get to Thaddeus, right? So I've got all that information out of whatever, 5-minute conversation, right? So my suggestion is, whether you're trying to build and sell a product, just to consumers, whether you're trying to, from a university standpoint, engage with people in the community, whether you're in community organizations trying to engage with the university people, have these conversations one-on-one and understand what the person's problem is, right? Because if they're not the right person, like, you got better things to do with your time and you want to find the right person, okay? Once you have that conversation in place, right, you start to understand a little bit more about that person's role in the organization, and you can start to kind of broaden your interviews, right? So I can start to ask about, can I, speak to other colleagues or, your supervisor, whatever it might be, so that you start to paint a bigger picture of this organization and how your organization, your product, service could fit into it, right? And who the decision makers are and all that kind of thing. In this conversation, Thaddeus is a decision maker because he's literally having the conversation with his son. So he's the decision maker on what information do I share with him, how do I structure it, et cetera, okay? And so we have, some idea of people's purpose. We have some idea of the value they're looking for because of the problem they're trying to solve. And we have some tools that we can use now to have these conversations with customers to get the information out of them so that I can more effectively help that person solve a problem, or I can understand that person's not going to be interested in what I got to sell, right? So again, I don't want to have to sell them twice. So I'm going to go find, if Thaddeus is not giving me the information that kind of lines up with what I'm trying to sell, then I can go find other people, right? And I can move on. And what did it cost me? 5-10 minutes of a conversation maybe, right? And furthering that conversation, if I can ask him for, referrals to other people like him or other people in the organization and be like, oh, do you have other people who are trying to address this need or who are trying to solve this problem in your organization? Because then those maybe are the people I need to talk to. So you keep having these conversations and eventually you find your way to the right person who has the problem and who can make a decision. Those may not be the same people, right? The person with the problem or the user may be different from the purchaser, okay? In which case you need to have now 2 conversations, but
All the time.
yeah, all the time. So we have that. Then what we want to do is think about, we got all this information, we're starting to build some ideas about how to better build a product or service, how to better position product or service or collaborative opportunity that we have. And now we want to think about what kind of assumptions are we making, right? Because all this stuff we're doing, it's just all guesswork. It's all assumptions that we're making. And so the better we can validate those assumptions with actual data, the better chance we have of being successful in the sales or the collaboration or whatever I'm trying to build. And so you think about assumptions that we make from a business perspective. We're assuming that people are seeking a certain value proposition. We're assuming that certain customers are interested in what we have. We're assuming certain channels will work. We're assuming people will actually pay X dollars for X product, right? So all these things are assumptions. And we can map those assumptions on, again, maybe traumatic, but the old 2x2 matrix, right? And the matrices are, so my father would kill me. He was a math professor for like 40 years. And there's 2 things I can never remember. I consider myself intelligent, but 2 things I can never remember. One is, which way does the greater than less than go? I don't ever remember that. And the other is X and Y. So whatever the vertical one is, you want to think of that axis on a 2x2 matrix in terms of how critical is it to the success of the business or the initiative you're trying to launch. In other words, if you're wrong about your assumption, is it dead in the water, or is it, you can deal with that, right? So in a business case, if you're wrong about a value proposition or you're wrong about a customer segment, chances are you're in trouble. You're going to have a really hard time, right? And it becomes very, very critical to success. If you're wrong about something like some of the activities you got to do or something like that, it's not as critical. You can overcome that, right? So you kind of map all these assumptions on this axis. Top of the axis is most critical, bottom of the axis is least critical. And then the horizontal axis is how much confidence do you have in your assumption. And the confidence comes from validated learning, which comes from conversations with people. You can Google all you want, you can chat GPT all you want. That's not really validated, right? In the truest sense or in the best sense. You want to have conversations with people so that you can understand, is this actually accurate or not from that person's experience, right? So again, you kind of map out these assumptions and you look at and you say, the least confident assumptions that, the least confidence you have in your assumptions, those are the riskiest ones, right? Because you don't know anything. It's just a straight up assumption. But if you have a lot of confidence in your assumption because you've had some conversations, you've done that research, you're a lot more confident in that assumption. So you don't necessarily need to go test that one quite as quickly, right? And so when you map these things out, it gives you a little bit of a roadmap of like, what steps do you need to take? What kind of conversations do you need to have? You want to look at the things that are the most critical, that you have the least confidence about, right? So the top left of that 2x2 is where you want to start. And whatever you think is up there, that's where you start. And you say, I need to test that assumption, okay? And so to continue the trauma, you go through the old scientific method. I don't know, they still teach scientific method in school? Yeah? Okay. You don't know? Right. I don't either, right? I forgot it too. But it's literally like you're using the scientific method, right? In a simple form. You're making a hypothesis, assumption, guess, whatever you want to call it. You're designing an experiment, you're going out, you're collecting data, you're coming back and reviewing the data, and you're deciding, is it true or is it false, right? So this is the process you go through with any conversation and any collaboration you want to have, based on those most riskiest assumptions, okay? And so what you do is, you go, all right, what experiment can I run? How can I set this up so that I can test that assumption as quick and dirty as possible? I want to invest as little money, as little time in being able to test this thing as I possibly can, okay? So you kind of step back and you think it through and you go, well, I'm trying to test that, Thaddeus would pay X dollars for this service that I'm trying to offer him as a father of a teen about to go off into life to learn about money management. So I go, that's what I'm trying to test, right? And how am I going to test that? So I can design up experiments. How am I going to test these things, right? So I can set up a landing page. I can, whatever it might be. And again, you want to do it as quick and dirty as possible. And with all of this AI boom, it's phenomenal. Like, it is bananas how quick and dirty and easy it is to test these things and to make people believe that you have something that you don't have, right? Now, there's some morality that comes into play here, and you all can draw your own individual line here, right? I'm not saying sell anything. I'm saying see if people are interested, right? And the way that you can see if people are interested is, what are they willing to give you? Are they willing to give you an email address? Are they willing to give you a phone number to show you that they're interested in something? Well, that means something, because most people aren't willing to hand out their email address and phone number to just anybody, right? So there's a little bit of an inclination there that, yes, if I drive Thaddeus to a landing page and it lays out all the information I just gathered from him through that interview about, here's the solution that I've got, here's the problem you've got, here's all this language about that I took from this conversation. If you're interested, learning more, click here, give me your email address. That's really good validation, right? If I send that out to 100 people and 20 of them give me their email address, it's at least an indication there's something there, right? And again, with all these kind of AI tools, I can set that landing page up in like half an hour, right? Really easy. And I'm not a tech guy. I'm not smart with the tech stuff, but it blows me away how quick this is. And so before I run the experiment, though, I want to understand that, again, I'm going to be emotionally invested in these things. So when you're having these conversations and you're trying to engage with these organizations and these people in the organization, you're emotionally invested. You want them to do something. You want them to buy something. You want them to sign the agreement. You want them to partner up and collaborate on whatever you're doing, right? So you're emotionally invested in this thing. And what that means is you're going to talk yourself into lying to yourself often, right? Where you're going to think there's something there that isn't really there, or you're going to exaggerate some of the good signals and ignore some of the bad signals. It's just human behavior, right? So if I know that going in, I want to set up an experiment and I want to have all these metrics in place, and I want to say, here's what I'm trying to do. Trying to test demand for this, right? Trying to see if people are interested in this thing. So I'm going to drive them to this landing page I set up. I'm going to ask them to give me their email address if they're interested, or even better yet, I'm going to ask them to pre-order something, right? I'm going to go the sort of the Kickstarter route, because if you're willing to give me a credit card and pre-order something, that's the best validation I can get, right? Again, don't sell it. Make it very clear it's a pre-order. so you don't get yourself into trouble. And think about what kinds of numbers make sense. So let's say I'm going to try to get this in front of 1,000 people, right? I'm going to get this landing page in front of 1,000 people, and out of 1,000 people who visit it, what's a decent number that would give me their email address or click on this button or whatever that would say there's some indication here that there's something here worth pursuing, right? And this has to a lot of times to do with industry standards, and you can kind of Google and figure out what are decent numbers. But let's just say it's 20, right? So I can say like, okay, if 20 people out of those 1,000 click this button or give me their email address, I can say that's a successful experiment, right? If less than 5 do it, I can say I failed. And if somewhere between 5 and 20 do it, there's something there, but something's a little off, right? So I set all these metrics up ahead of time, because what that does or helps me to do is to take the emotion out of it and just say, look, I told myself if 20 do it, I'm good, and here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go and now I'm going to test my next riskiest assumption. If less than 5 do it, it failed, so I got to go back to the drawing board. And if somewhere between 5 and 20 do it, maybe I got to use a little bit of a different channel. Maybe I have to use a little bit of different language, right? So I set all these metrics and everything up ahead of time. I run the experiment for a week or whatever time frame I decide I'm going to run it, and then I look at it and I try as best as I can to just stick with the numbers and to trust myself and say, this is what I set up, this is what's going to drive my decision-making process, right? And I run those experiments and I just do it over and over and over and over and over again. For riskiest assumption, check the box, right? Test it, get to a place, you can tweak it, get to a place where you're like, all right, I got some good learning, people are interested in this, what's my next riskiest assumption? And so on and so on and so forth, right? So again, if you're trying to build these collaborations and partnerships between the organizations, you can do the same thing, because you're dealing with people, and these people have a job to do, and in that job that they have a responsibility, and they have metrics and things that they have to achieve. So understanding that will help you to design these things so that you can sell your collaboration to them, you can sell your product, you can sell your service, you can work together to build a program, whatever it is you're trying to do, right? And so you want to understand their purpose, you want to understand the problem that they have, you want to understand from their experience, right, as much and as rich as you can through those 5 questions, what exactly is the problem that's going on, all that language around how it feels and what competitive products are and all that kind of thing. You want to think about what are the assumptions you're making for this conversation or this collaboration or this product or service, and then you want to figure out, how do I go test those things, right? Because otherwise you're just blown in the wind, right? You're making decisions based on guesses, and for me, I got too many things and too little time and too little money on my hands to go wasting it on just guesses, right? I did a lot of that when I was a kid, and I grew up and learned that that's not a really good idea. And so, that's kind of the process that you want to go through, that I would recommend you go through, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're trying to build, no matter what collaborations you're trying to have. It's simple. It doesn't take a long time. The more you do it, the more you practice it, the better you get at it, and the more efficient it becomes, and the greater success you're going to have, right? Because one, I'm trying to understand Thaddeus' experience. He appreciates that, right, when people are asking him about his experience. 2, I'm trying to deliver him a better solution than what he's currently using to solve a problem that he has. He appreciates that. Even if things don't don't come to fruition, he still appreciates that I've given him that time and made that effort, right? So when people come to me in my role at a university and say, we want to do this for your students, or we want to do this for you as a leader, or we want to do this for you as an administrator or a teacher or whatever, I appreciate if they take the time to get to know me. And I appreciate if they take the time to get to know, what are you struggling with and what are you having problems with, right? Because if I'm good with this and you're trying to sell me this, there's no really reason for us to talk. You're going to have a really hard time getting to me and convincing me to change my behavior, which is what you're trying to do, right? And then if you follow up with me, right, in that first conversation or in the first couple conversations, I may not even know anything about what you do. Now, I've probably stalked you to figure out what you do and why you want to talk to me, but we didn't even talk about that. You're just talking to me, and you're trying to learn about me, right? And another conversation or two down the road, now you're finally coming back to me. And what happens is, when you try to sell me a solution to a problem using my own words, it is extraordinarily difficult for me to say no to that, right? Because you literally are telling me what I told you. And if I start talking to him about having this fear and all these things that we just talked about, he's going to be like, oh, damn, that might be a good idea. I might have to check that out, right? And again, I'm not necessarily trying to sell it at this point. I'm just trying to continue the conversation and sort of reel him in, okay? And then eventually we get to the point where, yes, he is interested. Okay, now we can really start talking nuts and bolts about buy this, use this, let's sit down and work out an agreement. How are we going to build this project? And that's the kind of thing, like we did it with the prison, we did it with these community partners. For my role is always trying to understand them so that when the time comes for us to really put, pen to paper and build things out, there's a lot greater certainty that there's going to be something of value there for that person and whatever it is that person's trying to do in their job. With this warden, his job is, he's a lot of jobs, but one of his jobs is he wants to do what he can while these men are there so that when they leave, they don't come back, right? He's like, I don't want to see you again. You don't want to see me again. Let's just sever this relationship, right? Well, what can he do while they're there so that there's a greater likelihood of that happening? And through conversations, we were able to figure out, right, that these kind of things work and these kind of things aren't in place, and here's some of the problems that they're experiencing, and here's ways to solve them. And so that makes the collaboration between an academic institution and a state prison a lot smoother and cleaner, which is all I'm interested in, right? Working for anybody who works in a university or works with a university or works with a government organization, it is not easy, it is not clean, and it's just a headache, right? And so the easier you can do it, the easier it's going to be for everybody. And the more you can understand and solve my problem, the more of a champion I become of you, right? And whether I'm the actual decision maker or not, if I'm your champion, I'm going to be sort of that internal voice in the organization to try to help open doors for you, make sales for you, get in front of people, students or faculty or, advisors, whatever they may be, okay? And so that's really kind of like a high-level overview of a process that I think it works. Well, I know it works because we built a very successful business exactly using that and only that process. And I built successful programs using that process. And when the programs failed that I've tried to build at the university, oftentimes I kind of sped through that, or I skipped some steps, or I fell into my own trap that I advise people not to, and saying, yeah, but this is a really good idea. This is a really good idea, and it's going to work. Why? Because I'm smart, right? And I fall into that trap, and it doesn't work because either I didn't do the work or I didn't pay attention, right? I didn't take the information and the data I got and let that information and that data tell me what to do. So, when you're working on ideas, you just got to kind of remove yourself as much as possible. And you may think it's the greatest idea in the world, but I tell my students this all the time: your opinion is 100% irrelevant. Period. Like, hard stop, period. You are not buying it, you are not using it. And so you may think it's great, doesn't matter. You got to find the people that are willing to use that thing or buy that thing or enter that partnership so that you can solve problems for them. Right. Did you have a question?
I was going to say that I find that process that you're talking about should be implemented more with people that are writing grants.
Yeah.
Because they very rarely get all the information from the stakeholders that they're writing about.
Mm-hmm.
And so once they put out this grant, they put in this application, everybody likes it, right? They might even get approved for it.
Mm-hmm.
But then the implementation of that grant is the number one thing I hear people asking is, well, who asked for this?
Yeah.
When you don't consult the stakeholders of what they really want, what the problems really are that they're having, and you just kind of blanket prescribe, right? But the problem with that is, and this is the question, with dealing with those timelines, how far in advance can you be working on this prior to something, you're starting a program,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get should I be working 6 months, a year in advance prior to dealing with or knowing that this, whatever, however I'm funding this thing or however I want to implement it, how far in advance do I need to be asking these questions?
As far as you can, and especially if you're talking about collaborating, cooperating with other organizations, understanding it takes a long time, especially if you're talking grants or state level or community foundations or universities, whatever, right? Those decision-making processes are not quick. And so the more you can do your research and the more you can start to understand what their process is like, who are the people that are making decisions, and the other thing is the person who's making a decision might have a process in place on paper to say this is how the decision process has to go. But at the end of the day, they're a person, right? And so, if I know I have to do A, B, C, D, but I'm really a big champion of yours and C might be a little bit of an issue, I'm going to figure out how to get around C. I'm going to help do some work for you, right? The only way I can do that, though, is if you've done your homework and you've figured out what's going to ring my bell, right? And what's going to make me look good to my boss, then I'm going to be willing to help you, right? And so all those things can happen before you even start any formal process of applying or working on paperwork for any kind of an agreement, right? Again, I'm a person. Learn about me, learn about what problems I have in that role in my life, and does whatever you're going to think you're going to bring to the table, is that going to help me solve a problem I have, right? We work with a lot of, past few years we've had maybe $1.5 million or so in grants that we brought in, right? And part of that is me and people on my team doing the work to get to know the organization and get to know the people making decisions in the organization to say, what is it they're really looking for? I can see. Yeah. I can see on paper on websites like, okay, these are your metrics. These are the, buckets you fund, whatever. Great, fine. But I can sit down and I can talk to you, or somebody on my team can sit down and talk to you and really understand, like, what does that mean to you, right? Because especially with organizations, mission and values and priorities and all that, those are words, and those words mean something different to her than they mean to you, even though they're the same word. And so if you're the decision maker or you're the decision maker, I'm better served if I can understand what those words mean to you, right? Yeah.
Before we run out of time, I do want to ask, what advice or experience have you had in terms of doing all these things separately with different ESOs or different university programs, and then tying it together, where some of us, working together, want to kind of do some of the same things, sharing ideas, but what's your advice there so that we can build like a stronger group that's really, doing this maybe different places across the state?
Yeah. So this is there needs to be, I've found there needs to be a champion, who's really kind of driving something, especially if you're talking about partnering across organizations. That gets painful and slow, especially when you're dealing with entrepreneurs and people who tend to be entrepreneurial. We don't like slow and we don't like painful, right? And so finding a champion and then getting those decision makers together and having that kind of conversation, understanding, these are the problems at this university, these are the problems at this university, these are the problems at this ESO. This is really what we're trying to get at, and trying to align and sort of configure those, right? And just get a big old whiteboard out and start mapping it out. Here's where I am, here's where you are, here's where we are. These are the problems these organizations have, these are the problems these organizations have, and how do we start making those linkages? But again, you're an individual, and individuals are going to make those decisions, right? And so I would say, I do it all the time, where I just get a group of people together on, literally now on Zoom, and we just kind of hammer it out, right? And we go, look, well, this makes sense, we can play together. We're trying to get after the same thing, or you can complement what I'm doing and vice versa, or you can't, in which case, let's not waste each other's time anymore. So I would just get down to it, and I would get the people you think are decision makers on a call or in a room together and have that conversation and just start to understand their problem and start to understand the current solutions they're trying to use to solve that problem. Yeah.
As you form this framework of these 5 steps through the years to find something you really think is effective, what was maybe a 6th one that was originally in there and maybe you found wasn't quite as important as what you landed on, if any?
No, we pretty much nailed it from the start. No, I'm just kidding. I think one of the traps a lot of us tend to fall into has to do with price, right? And they're like, how much are you willing to pay for this? Or what, we're talking to an organization, what kind of budget do you have for this, that kind of a thing. And so I think starting to focus on that, I think, for young people, you guys are pitching, right? Right? So when the young people get up and they make pitches, as soon as they put numbers on the screen, that's all anybody wants to talk to them about, right? So as soon as numbers come into play, that becomes the focus. And so that was one of the things where we were like, all right, let's take the numbers out of the equation for the moment. Before we get to that, let's understand really what we're trying to get to. So I would just say, wait for the numbers. Because again, if I'm in an organization and I have budget lines, I have things I'm in charge of, to some extent, I get to choose what to do with that. And if I need something more than what I've got, there's people I can go to, right? If you make a good case to me and you're really giving me something that's like, yeah, I got this problem and it really solves it, and he wants $5,000 for it and I only got 3, I can go find 2.
Or you may have been willing to give me 10.
Correct, exactly. Yeah. So I would just take, as long as you can, take the numbers out of it, right? Because if you hook me, I'm going to be real creative in figuring out how to get the numbers right.
Just a time check, about 5.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think my Coker students have some questions.
Your Coker students have questions? You got any questions, guys?
The only thing I can think of is, as an entrepreneur, what's something, and also as a professor, that you use to be able to manage your time between trying to sell people, trying to come up with new ideas, but then also teaching these ideas and teaching other students? Like, how do you manage that workload and that time management?
Delegation. No, it's so I'm not the right person to ask that question. I suck at it. So sorry, I can't help you on that one. I really do. I'm terrible at it. I'm always behind on things. It's just bad. I would say find somebody who's good at it, right? And kind of walk beside them, have them help you and give you some guidance. My wife's wonderful at it. She doesn't cross into my professional life because neither one of us wants that, so she can't help me there. But I have people at work who really try and help keep me on task and go, well, do you really need that thing over there, right? So it all has to do, I think, with surrounding yourself with really good people and understanding, if you're really good at that, you don't need anybody to help you with it necessarily, right? But if you're just not really good at that, find somebody who's good and have them help you.
I'm just curious what the first concert you attended, since you asked us. And then a more serious question, since the experiential learning stuff also did some online versions, particularly in COVID, do you have thoughts on online education or teaching online as opposed to face-to-face?
Yeah, first concert is Tiffany. Yeah. Yeah. Cool fact about me, though, that tells you a lot of what you need to know about me is I met my wife at a rest area on the way to some Dead shows in the 90s. So those are the best. I went to like 100 or so Dead shows. Second question, sorry.
Online, like just thoughts on teaching entrepreneurship online versus face-to-face?
Yeah. I think it's better face-to-face, right? But I think, to me, this idea of entrepreneurship, it's just skill development. Really, you're trying to help people build skills. And so, yes, it's a little more difficult and there's more variables that come into play online. However, I think that, you can still have people going through exercises and doing these certain activities and things to build the skills, right? I think it's a little more difficult because you're not together and it's harder for me to learn from you and from her and all this kind of a thing. But that's part of why, like, the curriculum we built, it's all digital and it's all online, right? And we kind of built it that way intentionally to say, look, you can do this in a classroom, but you can do this stuff online as well, because we know it's going there and there's a lot of people doing it. But it's certainly more difficult and I think more isolating, and that's hard when you're trying to teach these things because it really is skill building, and a lot of the skills have to do with human interaction.
What do you think about the creative entrepreneurship space? I find that most programs, when they're teaching creatives to be entrepreneurs,
Yeah. So if we're looking at entrepreneurship and you're talking to young people about starting businesses, it takes a ton of self-motivation to do this. So the way I approach it is to say, look, there are these, I call them human skills. I don't call them soft skills. There are these human skills that your phone can't teach you. There are all these business skills that your phone can teach you, right? So I'm going to teach you these human skills, and I'm going to tell you and give you some guidance on the types of business skills you need to learn. Go start learning those on your phone or somewhere else, right? Because if you don't have the self-motivation to do that, you should probably find a different career path, is my opinion, right? But these things, you can't learn this kind of stuff, from a phone, in my opinion, right? Because you can't build those skills. You can't learn to play the piano from a book, or you can't learn to play basketball watching a video, right? Those kind of things. So I get some flack from colleagues, but it's not that my business discipline colleagues are not relevant. I don't mean to say that in any way, shape, or form, but a lot of the basics for those things can be learned elsewhere, and I can spend my time with them on some more sort of meaningful, more impactful skill building. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna add to sometimes if a session or class or something is in marketing for entrepreneurs or the startup, but maybe it's like a business 101, then just go, because you can apply that to whatever you're doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be for an entrepreneur, for
Right.
a filmmaker, or for a creative. And I think that's where you kind of see that translation is not really translating, because you want filmmakers and you want creatives to come to this session, but you're only going to talk to them in that sense. But that's not what they don't only need that. You see what I'm saying? So I think I feel where you're coming from there. So I think it's just, we got to kind of open up the way that we brand some of it in a way, so that you're able to cross section and not just feel like you're focused on one thing.
So with
Yeah, and I'm sorry, real quick. A lot of times,
with your university,
Mhm.
are y'all doing that aspect of? So I know our university has different schools, and those different schools don't often cross paths. So,
correct.
So are in your university that you're working at? Are you doing
100%.
cross-class?
100%. That's the only way I'll do it.
Okay.
I don't, yeah, it's the only way. I mean, otherwise, what am I doing if I'm only saying I'm going to serve, this slice of students, right? Like, no. I think what I got is important, so I think everybody should get it. So my job is, how can I work so that everybody gets it? All right, and it comes down to those same sort of conversations of understanding what do these other people value, right? And what are problems they're experiencing, and can I help them, right? So in this department, in the STEM departments, they don't get access to a lot of this information, a lot of this knowledge, right? But a lot of them want to go and create products or inventions or whatever. Okay, cool. I got skills that you're going to need to do that. So let's figure out how to play together, right? And it could be courses, it could be workshops, it could be whatever, right? But we can build that out once I understand the problems you got. So I don't want to keep going if we're way far over, but
Oh, you're not way far
I'm
over.
happy to hang out.
Oh, we are over.
There you go.
It's 11:31. So we can go ahead and wrap it up. All right.
We can wrap it up. You can find me online, right? If you have any questions, I'm always happy to hop on calls or whatever and share what I know and learn what you're trying to do and how I can help. So LinkedIn's the easiest way to get me.